An apparently ordinary outing, a group of school kids and a trusted adult. But that night something got out of control. When she got home, one of the teenagers who was on that outing started showing signs that made her parents very worried and on alert. But she said everything was fine, only it wasn't. Hours later, a silence in the bathroom at home would reveal a nightmare that girl had gone through. And a criminal case would start to be investigated. No one could have imagined what had happened during those hours away from home. Why did no one help, and what was the real reason for that trip? I'm Marcos Campos. Welcome, everyone. There are new episodes here every week. Like real cases? Subscribe and follow me at Yuzu Marcos Campos on Instagram. Scan the QR code to join my broadcast group where I always share the latest news. And I want to make a special request once again for you guys, because I'm sure it's really hard, right? Because the only category we're competing in at the Best Awards is curiosities, right? Kind of outside the tourism context here, but I think maybe soon, who knows, the Best Awards might add a specific category, right? For real cases. But there are a lot of huge channels there, and it's tough to compete. But I believe that if you take 5 or 10 seconds, I'll leave the QR code here for you and also the link in the pinned comment, just 5 or 10 seconds. At most, you just go there and click the little heart on the channel here, Marcos Campos, and I'll really appreciate it. Who knows, maybe we can make it to the finals of the award. That would be really cool, really. So, it's an incredible recognition, guys, and you who follow the channel are the ones who could get us to that level, okay? So, if you could do us that favor, I'd really appreciate it. Deal? Look, guys, today's story takes place in the Dominican Republic, okay? It will tell the story of a math teacher at a school, a guy about 34 or 35 years old who got involved with a 16-year-old teenager, his student. And this involvement led to deadly consequences. Deadly ones. But no weapons, okay? No pistols, knives, nothing like that. An extremely shocking case of selfishness that, in 2023, sent the Caribbean girl Esmeralda Riches Martinez to her grave far too soon. Well, let's get to know this whole story in detail. So let's get to the facts. Look, guys, while I was preparing today's episode, I kept thinking about how much responsible parents worry about their teenage children. Please stay alert, okay? I've said this many times. As a father, I feel the same way. We're all caught up in the rush of daily life, right? It's worth it, guys. Take a moment from your day and make checking what's going on part of your routine. Because adolescence is a period that we know is complicated, right? Sometimes walls are built, so we need to keep an eye out to avoid bigger problems down the road, right? Among these everyday things we can keep an eye on, I would say friendships, right? Local company that the teenager is hanging out with and other things. And among those other things, of course. Because no matter how good the school is, there can still be a competitive environment there, right? Violent disputes, bullying, and even a lot of confusion. And today's story began precisely at the school where Esmeralda, a 16-year-old teenager, studied in the Dominican Republic. Naturally, Esmeralda's parents were very worried about her. And so, on February 12th, 2023, when the girl wanted to go on a trip to the beach with some classmates, she insisted a lot. You know how it is, right? So that they would allow her to join this hangout with friends, and her parents decided to check out this story more closely. So according to the account of Isabel Martinez herself, Esmeralda's mother, she said she called a teacher at the school, the math teacher, John Kelly, and made sure he would be there. She said the following: "Look, take care of my daughter for me. I'm only letting her go because she's with you." And guys, it was just an activity at a beach called Macau, okay? No international trip, no excursion in the forest, or risky activities. Just a simple outing. Where would 4 teenagers be, accompanied by the teacher? However, hours later, when the daughter came back from that walk, let's say, from that outing at the beach, she was acting really strange. It was close to midnight when she arrived, accompanied by a friend and that teacher who dropped her off at home. The parents soon realized that something was going on and even confronted their daughter about it. The mother asked, "Daughter, you seem strange. Are you pale?" Esmeralda replied, "Oh, Mom, I'm fine. Nothing's wrong." She also added that she was having cramps, that she was on her period. So, Mrs. Isabel still insisted once again, "But you seem strange to me, daughter. Tell me what's wrong with you." And after that, she even asked her daughter if she had taken anything, drugs, right? Or taken any medicine because she seemed sick. Well, anyway, after all these denials from her daughter, right? Telling her parents not to worry, saying it was nothing. They ended up going to sleep, following the family's routine, right? That night, already in the early hours, the father still heard his daughter talking to someone on her cell phone. He said that the teenager told someone that she was feeling better. So the next morning when the father went to wake his daughter up and get her ready for school, right? Esmeralda wasn't in her room and didn't answer her mother's calls to get out of the bathroom and hurry up. But unfortunately, a few minutes later, the girl was found lifeless in her parents' bathroom. Completely shocked and in disbelief about what had happened, they had no choice but to call the police. And soon the teenager's body was sent to the medical examiner's office for forensic analysis and determination of the cause of death. And at this point in the story, I ask, any guesses, dear friends? Did I hear someone say overdose? Or do you have another option? Maybe she took her own life. What else? Maybe it's not that obvious, okay? So let me reveal it. The medical examiner's report detailed that what led to Esmeralda's death were intimate injuries, vaginal and uterine, with extreme and internal bleeding, acute, severe, and also hemorrhagic or hypovolemic shock. There were also marks on her body. I don't know if they were bruises or scratches, some signs of struggle or defense. Something like that, which was not definitely clarified by the sources consulted. So, even abducted, as they say, a word to the wise is enough. We can already get a little closer to the terrible events of that night. But don't jump to conclusions. Because in my view, the events don't fit either of the two most likely hypotheses and correspond to the worst case scenario. The first thing that came to mind was abuse, intimate violation, and non-consensual intercourse. So here it's about finding and arresting the perpetrator. The other possibility was a tragic event, similar to what was reported in March 2024 when a 24-year-old woman died during a romantic encounter with the player Dimas from Corinthians. Who remembers that case? In that episode, tests confirmed the complete absence of alcohol, drugs, or violence. But the victim had severe hemorrhaging followed by cardiac arrest. Sources later reported that the investigation found no criminal action. Of course, both in Dimas's account and Esmeralda's, some more sensationalist newspapers tried to theorize about the disproportionate physical characteristics of the men involved in the sexual activities, but that theory didn't gain traction. So, to unravel the mysteries of today's true crime, we need to investigate the victim. Esmeralda Riches Martinez. Esmeralda, 16, lived with her parents and younger sister. She was in high school and was a true representative of her generation. She used social media a lot, especially TikTok. She also dreamed of becoming a model, but she was hiding a secret. In her posts, it was clear that the teenager was living a great passion, which, for her, was a great love. A relationship with someone who demanded secrecy. In other words, moments of happiness shown on social media were interspersed with episodes of melancholy. That's a more or less common behavior in adolescence, isn't it? However, in this case, it was more exaggerated because it involved her romantic relationship with Professor John Kelly Martinez, who was 35 years old, which turned into something more serious than just a simple platonic love. And sources suggest that it was the result of a dangerous power dynamic, which is not hard to believe, considering the age difference and the man's own professional position. since that position meant he had authority over the girl. All right, guys. So, we think that strategic outing on the night of February 12th probably wasn't the first time the two of them were alone together. And three of Esmeralda's friends also joined that walk on the beach. That John Kelly, obviously, and also a nephew or cousin of that wicked guy who was a man named Rubiel Moridio Martinez. Well, until the day of the tragedy, apparently, no one knew about the teacher's irregular activity who was involved with the teenager. Or if they did know, they hid it very well and are still hiding what happened that night. According to the complaint filed on June 14, 2024, before the District Court of La Alta Gracia, John Martinez, the teacher, organized that trip to the beach with his teenage students solely to take sexual advantage of the victim. Due to her vulnerability, he took the girl to a place that was unfamiliar to her. The place was El Cortezito Beach, where the young woman arrived with Martinez, his cousin, and the other three teenagers. Esmeralda then got into Martinez's car. Around 7:30 in the evening at the door of her house in Vista Alegre in the city of Higüey. But when they arrived at their destination, Professor Martinez separated Esmeralda from the group, walking with her to a more isolated place. In alleged complicity with his cousin, Rubiel Moridio Martinez, who then moved away to another area there on the same beach with the other three. Well, even if we're not being categorical, guys, we can mention that Rubio had a certain amount of alcoholic beverages available to the group, which normally shouldn't have been present on this trip, right? Since there were three teenage girls away from their guardians. But that's in an ideal, perfect world, isn't it? Esmeralda's victimization becomes evident in the details revealed by the autopsy, later performed by the National Institute of Forensic Sciences. This happened on February 19th, which the prosecution defined as an assault inflicted on her, causing uncontrollable bleeding as a consequence of extreme physical violence. From there, what can be defined as a tortuous journey begins, with several stops before Esmeralda arrives at her home. In the way I mentioned to you at the beginning of the episode, where the parents noticed that something was wrong, unfortunately, they later found the girl lifeless in the bathroom. Well, first, they then went to a gas station. When I say they, I mean the group, okay? The damn teacher and also the teenage girls, along with the covering-up cousin. They supposedly stopped at a gas station where the 16-year-old girl used the restroom. After leaving that place, they then went to a pharmacy near the gas station where they bought a pack of sanitary pads, a box of emergency contraceptive pills, the so-called morning after pill, and also a bottle of water. It's worth knowing in simple terms, guys, that the main component of the morning after pill is progesterone, which is a female hormone that, when administered in large amounts, can inhibit ovulation. I heard someone say, wow, that's more than just circumstantial evidence, right? Where there's smoke. Is it the pharmacy's Bom da Fogo? So they went to a store and Martinez, the professor, bought clothes for Esmeralda. After that, they stopped at the house of one of the teenagers who was in the group so Esmeralda could change clothes. The clothes she left at that house, including her wallet, were later returned by this friend voluntarily about 3 days after what happened. The prosecution claims that human blood and semen were found on several of those discarded pieces of clothing. After leaving that house, they went to their destination, the girl's family home, still leaving the person behind. Along the way, there was an alleged blue plastic bag with other evidence. A few days later, those items were recovered by the investigators and added to the investigation. Other bloodied clothes, which seems kind of strange, right? Other clothes, but that's how sources report it, so it's assumed that maybe they could be towels, something like that, that might have been used to stop some bleeding suddenly. Well, in the words of the prosecution, everyone present, those so-called friends, knew that Esmeralda had been a victim of sexual violence and that she needed urgent medical attention and had been bleeding irregularly for several hours. They passed by several health centers along the way, but nothing was done. However, in a cruel and inhumane way, Timidomal thought it was more convenient to take the girl to her home. And to cover up the crime, a teacher and several high school girls. Have they never heard in class in the little lessons that can constant or irregular bleeding cause serious problems? In other words, guys, literally while Esmeralda was bleeding out, everyone went their separate ways, hiding without giving her the urgent medical help she needed, and certainly telling her to keep her mouth shut. This situation is so absurd and surreal that if it were in a movie, we'd probably say, wow, what a terrible movie. It doesn't feel realistic. And here it confirms the professor's total lack of character, doesn't it? Later, the autopsy report mentioned, as you may remember, lacerations, abrasions, and bruises. Even so, the person responsible for the attack claimed it was a consensual, intimate relationship. Can you believe that? Some sources even mention that Esmeralda Riches was pregnant and that John Kelly, the professor, performed an abortion procedure on her to cover up the unwanted pregnancy, which was a consequence of his relationship with his underage student. But it's impossible to imagine what he was capable of doing or what really happened. We also don't know if any specific blood tests were done to really detect whether there was a pregnancy or not, right? And if intimate assault could have masked a previous pregnancy. Unfortunately, this information remained uncertain in the sources we consulted. However, the horrible scenario that Esmeralda's family had to deal with was this: violation and death, which prematurely ended a life full of dreams and achievements. It's worth knowing that John Kelly was married to another teacher, and the couple has 2 children, one of whom studied at the same school where his father worked. Later, it was determined that the school administration discovered, a week before the crime, that the teacher was harassing the 16-year-old girl. And no action was taken. It's really unbelievable, isn't it? Neglecting a situation like this out of fear, maybe, that something might affect the institution, but I'm sorry, but they're a bunch of bad people. Following the tragedy, psychologists from the Ministry of Education supported the victim's family, the accused's families, and Esmeralda's classmates. Investigation. The police requested the public prosecutor's office for the professor's preventive detention for 12 months. So John Kelly Martinez was incarcerated, right? He will remain as the adult responsible for that trip that ended with Esmeralda's death. In other words, he was the #1 suspect in what had happened. A trip, by the way, just a quick aside, strange. Questionable, isn't it? 4 girls with 2 grown men. Strange, too strange, way too strange. As a father of a girl, it gives me goosebumps just thinking about a situation like that. It's because we know, right, guys? Men are complicated creatures, aren't they? So, during the investigation, folks, the authorities recovered the vehicle in which Professor Martinez was traveling with Esmeralda Riches and her cousin as well, right? And also the other students. But don't lose sight of this detail, okay? The vehicle was a black Honda Accord EX16 because it was sold right after the tragedy. And the sale was made by Gais Berenice Espinal Riro for the amount of 850,000 Dominican pesos. And out of that amount, 500,000 was paid at Atacompre, plus a post-dated check. And the buyer was someone named Frank Eligio Paniagua Pilar, who, when he learned about the criminal case and the teenager's death, voluntarily handed the vehicle over to the authorities. Look, we only have one person with character here, right? Would you say that? Hey, that's right, man. You have to turn it in, right? And doing some research here, guys, we found out that Gais was the person who sold the car, the wife or ex-wife of the teacher. She is also a teacher, since she appears on the Ministry of Education's payroll as an elementary school teacher at a school in the eastern part of the city. We even considered it here, right? That Gais was innocent, a poor thing, just another victim of that scoundrel, that husband of hers. But with this whole thing about selling the vehicle, it seems like she became an accomplice, doesn't it? Hiding evidence and protecting her husband. During the course of the investigation, she was detained 4 times and was upset about it. And in her lawyer's words, the facts were individual. She is innocent, and both her children and her husband's children were affected, I have no doubt. They were left alone several times on the occasions when she was taken to the police station. And her defense even claimed that the real people responsible for Esmeralda's death, believe it or not, were the girl's parents, who didn't take her to a hospital. So guys, unbelievable, right, guys? How can someone have the nerve to say something like that? And besides, the kids must really be suffering, right? Like I said, the poor kids aren't to blame for having a worthless father and a mother who needs to wake up from the spell that pervert put on her. She's already knee-deep in mud. It's up to her shins. And the buyer of the vehicle, which was actually the crime scene, was also temporarily detained and had to explain himself to the authorities. And Geis's nephew, the so-called nephew, the cousin, the guy who was there at the beach, he was also detained, okay? He was involved in the whole process, and after being released on bail or something like that, Rubiel Murillo Martinez remained at the disposal of the authorities and had to report periodically to the authorities until the case was tried. Man, that's really low, isn't it? A thing like that is, I would say it's a twisted way of thinking, right? Accusing the victim's family of not taking her to the hospital. Because you guys remember well, man, we're talking about a teenager, right? The girl arrived. She must have already been suffering a lot, bleeding a lot and all that. I don't know what she used there to stop the bleeding temporarily. And she's going to tell her parents? No, I was assaulted there because I was already involved with the teacher. It's a very delicate situation, right? Which started long before this final episode and then put all the blame on the parents. It was shamelessness beyond measure, right? Let's sweep it under the rug. The teacher's lack of ethics, morals, respect, and character, right? By association or by osmosis, also the woman there who sold the evidence of the crime, right? Who actually waves at the car. Let's also ignore that and put the blame on the girl's parents, who are already suffering with grief. It's scary, isn't it, to think that there's someone capable of doing that. But anyway, well, guys. The prosecutor's document outlined the case against John Kelly Martinez and Rubiel Murillo Martinez, the two cousins or nephews, I'm not sure which. They are accused of the death of Esmeralda Riches as torture and barbarity, and a premeditated crime, with the perpetrators involved in all the actions, including the concealment of the facts. Like going to the bathroom and buying several items after committing the abuse, plus the attempt to eliminate evidence, clothes, and even the vehicle. To support the accusations, there were several images of places where they had been and passed through, which made it impossible for them to claim innocence. Regarding the teenage girls who were there in the group, obviously they were thoroughly questioned. They all admitted that they didn't trust anyone enough to report what had happened because there were hidden threats. Until it became a police case with arrest and trial. 14. March 14th, 2024. The court of the city of Hague tried and convicted John Kelly Martinez, 35 years old, a school teacher, on charges of rape and sexual assault of the teenager. Esmeralda Riches, including violations of laws protecting children's fundamental rights. His defense sought a 5-year sentence for sexual abuse, while the prosecution requested 30 years in prison. In fact, the defendant's lawyers argued that there was consent based on the reports from experts and witnesses. It's a shame once again, right guys, but it was a trial full of emotions, you know? It took a while due to 51 witnesses. And in the end, John Kelly was sentenced to 20 years in prison. That thing about the defense claiming there was consent when they were involved, is that true? Based on all reports, something was likely already happening between them. But that doesn't justify what this guy did to this girl, right? She might have consented to something intimate, but not to the guy going that far with her. Man, it's something that doesn't even make the person blush, right? Saying that to someone directly is really shameless, right? Good? In June 2024, the Criminal Chamber of the Court of Appeals ordered a trial on the merits against Rubiel Murillo Martins, okay? In Esmeralda's case, the guy had been acquitted in 2023 because there wasn't enough evidence to charge him, right? As a key part of the crime. But the Court of Appeals overturned that acquittal and upheld his involvement and the prosecution's charges against him. even though it removed the charges of murder, barbaric act, and the illegal possession of a weapon. If it happened exactly as reported, he was involved there in the sense of moving the group away from the predator to be able to act, right? Therefore, the court ruled that the defendant should be tried for complicity in assault and abuse based on the juvenile code, which is kind of like our child and adolescent statute, you know? A rebuttal. There are still loose ends in this case, right? We can't know because it wasn't reported what happened with the wife. The fact that he sold the car, we can't know about that either. If it was just to follow the guy's order like that, which doesn't seem to be the case based on his behavior when he was taken to the police station, right? So it's possible to know if complicity will be judged or not. And we also don't know the fate of the 3 girls who were with Esmeralda, okay? 3 girls who could have been the next victims, whose lives were also marked forever that night and who lived haunted by their memories. Oh no. I kept thinking here, right? Is poor Esmeralda the only victim? A perverted, wicked man disguised as a teacher. Let's walk on the beach. Suppose the guy had a modus operandi, not that he did. I'm not saying that, but that's the feeling, right? Like a beach, hey cousin, nephew, just go with the girls over there while I go here. It's really weird, right? Strange. We should check that out since I'm unsure. Now, borrowing a phrase from Nelson Rodriguez to finish. I hope their justice system doesn't let the guy out early because someone who's a scoundrel the day before is still a scoundrel the next day. Thanks for your company. A kiss from Rui. See you next episode.